And to talk a little bit more about this development, I was joined earlier by Tom Hartmann, host of RT's The Big Picture and author of The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America, and What We Can Do to Stop It. I first asked him if he thought there was enough evidence in this case to prove McDonnell's guilt.
You know, in politics, it's so weird and so bizarre. Don Siegelman, who is the former governor of Alabama, is sitting in a prison cell right now for a conviction for this kind of thing. And what he did was he appointed to an unpaid job as head of the Hospital Oversight Board, a guy that the two Republican governors before him had also appointed, the same guy, who never gave him any campaign contributions at all, who had simply contributed to a fund that was to have a statewide lottery. Siegelman got no benefit out of that whatsoever. Nothing, not even, you know, the Rolex watch. But he had angered Karl Rove, and Karl Rove went off on this vendetta and got Don Siegelman put in prison. I think that the big mistake, or not mistake, but I think the big thing that's driving the Bob McDonnell thing is that it got so much publicity over the last year, particularly in progressive media, that it couldn't be ignored.
Sure. Well, one of the things that came out in the email exchange between Johnny Williams and Maureen McDonnell is that the couple was in a lot of credit card debt, and it seemed was struggling. And one of the things, one of the first things that she was going to receive, but she didn't, was an inaugural dress. And she basically was complaining how they didn't even have money to pay for that. Do you think there's a takeaway here looking at what this says about the culture of people in high political office and just having to keep up with sort of this lavish lifestyle, you know, lavish possessions and destinations and so on and so forth? You
know, it could be, but there are a lot of politicians who are not all that lavish. You know, there are a lot of politicians who are just down and dirty, and who at high levels. I mean, you know, the governor of Montana, for example, and who just wears bolo ties and blue jeans all the time. And so there has been some speculation in the press that some of this was driven by either Bob McDonnell or his wife, or both of them, simply wanting to live the high lifestyle and always being super fashion conscious and all that kind of thing. That's all going to come out in the trial. It's hard to judge.
Right. Well, in his defense, the governor made it seem like he was just being singled out for all of this. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Sure.
The United States Supreme Court has already rejected this radical idea, and for good reason. Because if it were applied as the law of the land, then nearly every elected official, for President Obama on down, would have to be charged for providing tangible benefits to donors.
So he's spinning this a very interesting way. I mean, what do you think about what he just said?
I think there's some truth to what he said, and you know, from the Don Siegelman case on one end of the extreme to the Bob McDonnell on the other, most politicians in America fall somewhere in the middle. If you look at their donor list and you look at their voting record and you look at the meetings that they set up, you will find a correlation. And you know, what Bob McDonnell did is he didn't do it in a particularly sophisticated way.
And that's the only mistake he made?
If he had shoveled the money through Karl Rove's PAC, it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, if you take the money through a PAC or through a super PAC, it just, you know, the loopholes are so huge. It's almost like he's being punished for being stupid rather than being corrupt. Because you know, the next week is the 38th anniversary of the Buckley versus Vallejo Supreme Court decision, and that was the first time that the Supreme Court explicitly said that money is protected under the First Amendment. Now, the word money doesn't appear in the First Amendment, but the Supreme Court said it is. And then Citizens United, of course, really nailed that. So ever since Buckley, we've had this political zeitgeist in America that is money drives everything. I mean, you know, basically from the Reagan era forward, it's been all about the money.
We'll talk about, I mean, we just passed the 4th anniversary of Citizens United. Talk a little bit about how that really changed the ball game completely.
Well, Citizens United was the pinnacle. It was the capstone. It brought together the Buckley decision, which said money is protected by the First Amendment, and the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision, which was a little less than a decade later, that said that corporations have rights under the 14th Amendment. So now we have money having being protected by the First Amendment, corporations being protected by the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, was passed to free the slaves. It's just hard to imagine Abe Lincoln saying, "Let's free the slaves and the corporations." But this is what our Supreme Court has done over the last 38 years, and it has created a politically corrupt system in the United States at the state and local and federal level. I mean, it's happening all over the place. It's very difficult for politicians these days not to be corrupted by politics. In fact, it's increasingly virtually impossible to run for office without behaving in a way that could get you into this kind of trouble.
One of the things you mentioned was the loopholes, and I read an excellent article in the New York Times by Eric Lipton, in which he actually points out that loophole, that if you just basically funnel everything through a super PAC, you can get those lavish ski vacations and trips to the golf course, and a lot of people don't pay this loophole any attention. And it's amazing because it's just what you said. I mean, you can do it. It's just about how you do it. I just want you to shed some light on how this is being overlooked right now.
Right. Well, first of all, our media doesn't talk about it much. I mean, we kind of get it sideways, right? Like during the Republican primaries, it was, well, Shelley Adelson has decided that he's going to back Rick Santorum. Well, this week he's going to back Newt Gingrich, and all of a sudden, and you watch them pop up or down depending on which billionaire is giving who, how much money to whom. And the penny should have dropped for Americans. I mean, Americans should have been going, wait a minute, we're watching who's being funded by what billionaire? I mean, that's oligarchy, it's plutocracy. That's not democracy, that's not a republic. So I am frankly shocked that there's not more horror about this expressed in our media. I think this is a real serious problem. And politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, will tell you this is a problem. McCain-Feingold, which was an attempt to dial this back, which got blown up by Citizens United, was a bipartisan bill. The politicians don't like the fact, whether the Democrats or Republicans, don't like the fact that they have to spend 60% of their time outside their office, in a private office that they rent, dialing for dollars. That every weekend they have to go to fundraisers. It's crazy.
It really is.
And the one thing about these super PACs is that for entry-level politicians, low-level politicians, beginning politicians, it can cost $100,000, $200,000 to set up a super PAC. I mean, they're very expensive operations. So the big guys get to play with the super PACs. Small politicians, they run into these problems where they just try to take campaign donations, things like this, and then they get nailed.
Absolutely. Well, the system is not fair, to say the least. But that's unfortunately all the time we have. Tom Hartmann, host of The Big Picture and author of The Crash of 2016. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Amira.